a joyful sound unto Yahweh, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness, come before his presence with singing. Know ye that Yahweh, he is God. He hath made us and not we ourselves. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving, and into his courts with praise. Be thankful to him. Bless his name, for Yahweh is good. His mercy eternal, his truth to all generations.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Line by Line Bible Studies. Oop, wrong microphone. Not hot enough. There we go. All right. That's for music recording, which I was doing yesterday. So, we're continuing the book of Psalms, Psalm 69. We better pick up the context because it's been all weekend. But how can we forget Psalm 69? We'll pick it up at verse 22 once we read through it. So let's go right into it. A Psalm of David. Hold on a second here. All right, I'll try that again. A Psalm of David. Save me, O God, for the waters are come in unto my soul. I sink in deep mire, where there is no standing. I am come into deep waters, where the floods overflow me. I am weary of my crying, my throat is dried, mine eyes fail, while I wait for my God. They that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of mine head. They that would destroy me, being mine enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away. O God, thou knowest my foolishness, and my sins are not hid from thee. Let not them that wait on thee, O Lord of hosts, be ashamed for my sake. Let not those that seek thee be confounded for my sake, O God of Israel. Because for thy sake I have borne reproach. Shame hath covered my face. I am become a stranger unto my brethren, and an alien unto my mother's children. For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproached thee are fallen upon me. When I wept, and chastened my soul with fasting, that was to my reproach. I made sackcloth also my garment, and became a proverb unto them. They that sit in the gate speak against me, and I was the song of the drunkards. But as for me, my prayer is unto thee, O Lord, in an acceptable time. O God, in the multitude of thy mercy, hear me, in the truth of thy salvation. Deliver me out of the mire. Let me not sink. Let me be delivered from them that hate me, and out of the deep waters. Let not the water flood overflow me, neither let the deep swallow me up, and let not the pit shut her mouth upon me. Hear me, O Lord, for thy loving kindness is good, and then turn unto me according to the multitude of thy tender mercies. And hide not thy face from thy servant, for I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. Draw nigh unto my soul, and redeem it. Deliver me because of mine enemies. Thou hast known my reproach, and my shame, and my dishonor. Mine adversaries are all before thee. Reproach hath broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness. And I looked for some to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. They gave me also gall for my meat. I'm going to itch my eyelash. Sorry, I'm going to do that again. They gave me gall. Sorry. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. Let their table become a snare before them, and that which should have been for their welfare, let it become a trap. I'm sorry, is it like I got a screwy eyelash or something here? It's making it harder to read than normal. All right, this is just... Okay, that's unusual. Not a usual problem. And it makes me want to get a mirror or something. It looks like there's like a little bit of salt left in my eyes. I guess there's something from this morning. I don't know. All right, I think we're fixed. Let their table become a snare before... I'm just going to, verse 23. Let their eyes be darkened, that they see not, and make their loins continually to shake. Pour out thine indignation upon them, and let thy wrathful anger take hold of them. Let their habitation be desolate, and let none dwell in their tents. For they persecute him whom thou hast smitten, and they talk to the grief of those whom thou hast wounded. Add iniquity unto their iniquity, and let them not come into thy righteousness. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living, and not be written with the righteous. But I am poor and sorrowful. Let thy salvation, O God, set me up on high. I will praise the name of God with a song, and will magnify him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord better than an ox or a bullock that hath horns and hooves. The humble shall see this and be glad, and your heart shall live that seek God. For the Lord heareth the poor, and despiseth not his prisoners. Let the heaven and earth praise him, the seas, and everything that moveth therein. For God will save Zion, and will build the cities of Judah, that they may dwell there, and have it in possession. The seed also of his servants shall inherit it. I was thinking Judah, Jerusalem, or whatever. The seed also of his servants shall inherit it, and they that love his name shall dwell therein. To the chief musician. Okay. So we gone through, he talked about the mire, and then kind of about what it's like to be in the mire, right? And then it says, hey, deliver me out of this mire, right? It kind of goes for full circle in the, up to verse 20 or so. Or, what it is. They start talking about the reproaches of the enemy. And they give him gall for his meat. That's probably, like I discussed it last time, and I think of it more. Though literally of Christ. When it happened, David probably has, this is a sort of symbol for the bitter things he had to swallow. We say it's a bitter pill to swallow. Well, people oftentimes in life, we are handed bitter things that we have to accept. Bitter ironies, or like where you, I don't know. I try to put it far from my mind as much as possible. Like all the times, all the frustrations I've ever encountered, especially where say, I think I was working on a car mechanically or something like that. And I'm not an expert, but I need to do my own work sometime just because it's the only way. And, and doing something, I forgot what I was doing, but doing this stuff and doing it all and then realizing that it was wrong. And I'd gone a long way towards the end and it was wrong. And having to go back and undo hours of work, that always is, to me, a bitter thing. Because I always value my time as precious. I try to value it as precious. We're supposed to redeem the time. And so I consider the time I have precious, and I hate when I waste it. But even more so when it's something bitter like that, where I it's something I need to do, but it's taking twice as long because of my own mistakes. All right, but that's me giving myself gall for meat. All right, I've never experienced quite like David, that kind of bitterness that comes from having enemies without a cause. There's always some cause, right? And he clearly states the real cause is the Lord. That it's the reproaches, of the Lord that have fallen upon him in some way or shape or form. And that can be the case when you're following, if David's just being persecuted for not doing anything wrong, that's God's cause right there. Because he did righteousness. When you do nothing but righteousness, he says, yeah, you know my ways. I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect, but in this thing, the enemies that are coming after me are unrighteously coming after me. I mean, like I might have sins of a personal nature, but for the most part, which is most people's sins. Hopefully, I don't rob others. I don't think I do. I have to examine myself to make sure I don't have, because like you think like I don't steal, I don't commit adultery, and then you remember what Jesus said about adultery, and you think like, well, you know what, maybe I have robbed people, but only in that sense, only in that spiritual sense, where like maybe you could construe some sort of lack of attention to something, or lack of love, even for a brother, could be in some way a theft. In the furthest reaches of righteousness, where you're trying to look to be perfect, and realizing that you have a long way to go still. So there are regions where, like, I could say I'm guilty, but I haven't stolen from people. Maybe I've robbed my children to serve others. I don't know. Like I think like that. I've robbed them of myself to give myself to other things at times. A lot of times that is the sins of the parents very often. I only say it in my, people would say, Paul, you work from home, you homeschool your kids, you coach them. What is exactly you've robbed them of? I'm just saying, every parent, if they think about their children, they think about not all they've done, but what more they could do. That's how Jesus taught us to think about our service to him. Not that all that we've done, but what have we not done? What is there to do yet? And that is the proper approach. When you're seeking righteousness, you don't look at yourself and say, I'm not a thief, I'm righteous. I'm not an adulterer, I'm righteous. You look at it, and then you look deeper and deeper at what it means to steal, and what it means to be unfaithful. And you try to bore those down to the ultimate. And it's hard to see the bottom of that, because God himself is a being of infinite qualities. He has qualities that are actually infinite. Whereas everything about me is finite. At least, until the Lord gives me everlasting life. But even then, that's everlasting. That's not the same that is also infinite, but not the same as eternal. When I think of God's powers, I think of them as not merely having no end, but also having no bottom either, in a sense. And that almost doesn't make logical sense to me. If I think about it too literally. But in a sense, I feel like that way with righteousness. You never find the bottom. You can keep exploring it. We should be better than we were before. That's clear. The scriptures teach us to be as we walk with Christ, it's a process of sanctification. It means of making us more like him. And that's what the process should be. If we're studying Jesus and thinking about Jesus, we know we're not like him and we're sinners who need salvation. If we're given time and opportunity, it is only natural, if we have faith, that we're going to become more like him. In many ways, or more pleasing to him at the very least, in that sense. So in this thing, he really, in the bitterness, he begins to curse them, essentially. I'll call it cursing, because it's like, let their table become a snare. Let their eyes be darkened. Pour out your indignation. Let their habitation be desolate. No one dwell in their tents. That's a metaphor for having no children or issue, No one, they have tents and there's no one in them. Their tents is symbolic for the house of that family, because that's the way they lived. They were originally semi-nomadic, and they dwelt in tents. And the first tabernacle of God was in a tent. And so tents have a lot of they have a cultural force in the language, where that stands in for more than just a tent. It's a temporary dwelling, a tabernacle. The body is called the tabernacle of this flesh. It's also called the temple of this flesh. So don't take you gotta understand. It's it's interesting that there is both, isn't it? There was a tabernacle and there was a temple. But the interesting thing is, God was very satisfied with the tabernacle. and didn't seem very interested in there being a temple, which has always been interesting. It's something that man really desired, that permanence. And I get it, because the tabernacle was permanent too. It was just ready. It was movable and permanent in that sense. It had to be maintained, because you know what? You know what the beauty of the tabernacle is? It had to be maintained. I mean, you have to mend tents. You got to keep. It has to be paid attention to constantly. All the cords and stuff. Whereas a temple becomes a fixture. And having studied the scripture for a long time, to me that is very telling, because a fixture, there's some scriptures in Isaiah particularly that come to mind about, fastening things with nails and the workmen and idolatry. And there's some that fixing things in stone that has a long association with idolatry. And that's, I think, part of the reason why the Lord wasn't too hot about a temple. And also, when you see what eventually happened in the temple, including the worshiping of other gods and et cetera. And there was, at one point, a house of the Sodomites in the temple complex, whatever that means, because they had to take it away at some point. So, the temple got to be a very happening place. Yeah, even in the days of Jesus, when it was pretty confined to religious things, like we would think today of like church. It had there was order, decorum, but still, he found it to be completely unacceptable with the money changers, making their money, and that's when the zeal of thy house hath eaten me up, and that's why the temple is in here in the tents. The reference to that just draws that into my mind. So, when he calls on God to curse them, you should understand that as a Christian, that's not something we do. We don't curse. This is fine. It's an example in the Psalms. It's a man's feeling. This is how he feels. He thinks, hey, God, you know what? Because often this is what God does. But we are called to bless and curse not. Because God will do as he pleases anyways. But it is considered righteous for us not to call on curses. It is a higher form of righteousness rather to bless those who curse you, rather to pray for those who persecute you. That is something that Jesus taught us. And even in this, you can see David at the end when he says, but I am poor and sorrowful. He's saying, I take that as I'm saying this out of sorrow. I'm so upset. I feel the same way about mine. And here's the thing. I'm saying we shouldn't say that. I feel the same way. Kick their teeth in, Lord. Let me kick their teeth in. I want to kick their teeth in. I was telling my kids, I remember, when I say I love violence, it's because I remember when I first played football when I was 10 years old, when I realized I love to hit people and I love violence. I just knew it. I loved it. I love to knock people over and see them, just go flying on the ground. So I always hit people as hard as I could. Practice or in games, I always hit them hard. I mean, because my heart loved the violent act. If it was satisfying to my flesh, to my body, it feels good to explode, into people or things. But people was much more, because I had a lot of pent up anger against my fellow man. I got picked on at school and stuff, and I wanted to knock people over. I wanted to not just demonstrate strength, but I also wanted to develop it, because I was tired of being pushed around. And I understand the sentiment. When people do bad things, when people do, especially the kind of things that get you upset when you hear about things done, bad things done. Like I said, I don't like to be a hypocrite or holier than thou. We shouldn't be like that. I know it's like, I'm faithful to my wife. I talk about, there are, of course we know there are other deeper forms of such sin that one can be held accountable for, right? But we don't go, but we're so far from the real thing that, on some level, I feel no association. I don't feel much sympathy with adulterers. I don't. Because I've been faithful. And though I know I don't get all high and mighty about it, because I know, but for the grace of God, there go I. But the same thing with a lot of other sins. There are certain sins that are so far from us that they give us, they make us really angry against the people doing them. People who, murderers, of murderers of children, murders, all I can think about is like, okay, there's a huge war going on where kids are dying, people are dying. There's all kind. That's a good, war is the sum of all the human evils. There you go. That makes, when I think of all the suffering over that is brought about by the incompetence and by the wickedness of leaders here and there, they're all wicked. That's the thing is like, I don't mean to defend, evil rulers. But the thing is, good rulers need to rule well and not just be good or something. I on some level, it's like, how, what I'm saying? Like, where, the thing is, there have been wars going on all the time, and we're involved with them. But the victims are unworthy of our attention. As far as that's the way the media treats it, you never hear about it. Because it's like, why? Because because of who they serve. They serve not our interest. Anyways, so there's a lot of evil in the world that we could look at and makes us angry, want to be violent towards it. When you think about when people do unrighteousness, when they persecute people for precisely the reason because they're good. I'll fix that tomorrow. I just don't like, it's right in my eye. I'm like, oh, there it is. There's one hole in my window there. All right, so the people who, I don't know. There are times when I get really angry about things going on in the world. I guess I have to think about what's going on in the world now to think about David's feelings. Because I do feel that way. When I see people getting rich off of people suffering, war profiteering and all that stuff. When I see people getting rich off people suffering, even with disease. And also, you think about it, I was saying, people who died the past 2 years and who were diagnosed as having died from, from the major event that was going on at the time. I don't want to talk to Google's AI about it. That's the thing. But you guys understand me. At the time when people were dying from that, if you think about, or it doesn't matter what caused their death or whatever, if it was with other comorbidities or all that, just every death was every single death they counted. They took the corpse of your loved one and they used it to drive the rest of the people into a frenzy of fear. That makes me angry. And they used death to drive the whole herd into a frenzy of fear. And we're still suffering from it. They're just people who are still captivated by it. And they did it to them. And now, just the incompetence with which we are being led is going to lead to more and more suffering. And I've been saying this since the beginning of the whole thing. It's like, it's a slow-moving disaster that started 2 friggin' years ago. And it's like, they're talking about food shortages. That's what they're talking about. It's weird. I don't really think, that's worldwide. It's a worldwide market. But what that means is high prices and a lot of suffering in places where they don't have money. Or they're barely getting by on $1 a day. And all of a sudden that $1 a day doesn't buy what it bought. The little bag of rice or whatever they were getting by on. All of a sudden it doesn't buy that anymore. If that doesn't make you feel like, when you think of a bunch of politicians sitting around at a table enjoying themselves, that table being filled with poisoned foods, if that doesn't make you smile, when you think about, let it become a snare for them. That which should have been for their welfare, let it become a trap. And this is, And this indeed happened to the people who crucified Christ. God's curse will hunt people down. That's why we don't need to curse them, and we shouldn't. It's not good for us to yield to those feelings, because it's oftentimes rage and anger uncontrolled in a human being manifests against those who do not deserve it. I get angry, and it can end up spilling over onto my family. And when I'm angry, it often does. Period. And so I should try not to be angry. We should try to manage the forces that drive me there. And a lot of it has to do with, there's circumstances, but the way I react to circumstances has a lot to do with why I'm getting angry. The way we react to a lot of circumstances has a lot to do with why we're feeling the way we're feeling. Now, I want God to pour out his indignation on the wicked as much as the next guy. But I also remember that if that had happened at a certain point in the past, I would have been that wicked, being the wrath of God poured out on me. If God were to judge it all right at any given moment, any one of us might find ourselves on the wrong side of God's justice. As far as if you look back in your life, if there's points where you had not reconciled yourself to him. So I remember also that I'm a beneficiary of mercy. Let their eyes be darkened that they see not, make their loins continually to shake. Their eyes be darkened. That means to cause them not to see. There's a hidden wisdom I've talked about many times from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, or is it 3? It doesn't matter, 2 or 3, right in the beginning there. There's a wisdom, we speak this wisdom which God hath hidden in a mystery, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified our Lord. And that is kind of the way it is. He's saying, I don't want them to see what's coming. Let them foolishly go on in their ways. Let their eyes be darkened. There was there are many times in the scriptures it talks about comments on the blindness of people. People have a blindness that goes beyond the flesh. You could say he's cursing them, let them be literally blinded. But he means, in a sense, no, take away wisdom, take away insight from them. Let them have blind spots in that sense. So they can't see. A lot of times, have you ever been in a problem or in a situation where there was a simple solution, but you just didn't see it? You ever been in that situation where you had a problem in front of you and time was running out, but you couldn't figure it out because you just couldn't see the solution, which maybe was there as plain as the nose on your face? That's what can happen. We can be blinded. We can be looking right at something and still not see fundamentally what's really there. And that is, and boy, that's good when God steps in that moment. Sometimes you feel like it's inspiration, or sometimes it just is inspiration. Like when when it snaps into focus and you see, I see, I understand. When the light bulb turns on. Well, it's the opposite. Let the light bulbs go out, man. Let them not see. Make their loins continually to shake. And we talked about the loins, the small, the back, the seat of your power. It's like make them weak right at the place where it's most vulnerable, the loins. It's it's basically your core, the small, the back, the leanness, the lean spot. The part you need to gird up to go to battle. It says weaken them. At the very core of their physical, that strike at their loins is making someone incapacitated seriously. Pour out that indignation upon them and let the wrathful anger take hold of them. Well, because in the sense of it is to seriously weaken, to have an injury there. Or that's obviously from the idea of fear, or weakness. If their loins are shaking from weakness or from fear or from ignorance or whatever. In fear from ignorance, I guess. Pour out thine indignation upon them and let the wrathful anger take hold of them. Let their because that is a way the wrath of God is often, it takes hold. It grips. Fear grips them. I like those, that kind of language. Because that is how it feels sometimes. Like something has a hold on you. When you get, sometimes we can be trapped by certain kinds of thoughts or feelings, and they can get a hold of us. At times, sometimes people are under the grip of fear. And we should not fear. Because it's definitely, it's not exactly the opposite of faith, but it's definitely antithetical to faith, right? Faith casts out fear. It should anyways, right? Because, I think of Peter walking on the water with Jesus. He became afraid and he began to sink. He doubted. Fear can cause us to doubt. Because doubt is the opposite of faith, for sure. Or unbelief is the opposite of faith. But doubt is on the road. It's that's like the conduit to unbelief is doubt. And the conduit to doubt is not just fear, but fear is one of the things that leads us to doubt. And so, even through this whole thing, I forgot if I mentioned it, but whenever I read it, I keep thinking about Peter walking on the water. Because, they're sinking in the mire. I love it that we have in Christ this idea that we don't have to swim in the water. We can walk it. You know what I mean? We can walk over the deep waters that try to engulf us. When we have faith, we can literally just skip right over the top. We don't need to curse our enemies. We have the luxury of blessing them. We can afford to bless them because we have all the blessings in heaven and earth in our very fingertips. It's like God has adopted me as his son, and I'm here as his ambassador. And so better not mess with me. That's why. Because that's the promise we have in Christ, man. That, we want to talk about salvation being an accomplished fact. Well, then talk about that being an accomplished fact. In faith, all that is true. It is hard to stand up and take your rightful place in the gifts that God has given you sometimes, because it is a high calling and we feel ourselves not equal to it. And the truth is, that's right. We aren't equal to it. We aren't equal to it. But still, we've been called to it, so get in. Be believing, not doubting. Have faith, not fear. And so, let their habitation be desolate, let none dwell in their tents. We talked a little bit about that. He wants them completely wiped out. For they persecute him whom thou hast smitten. And talk to the grief of those whom thou hast wounded. And that definitely reminds us of Christ. Also, just like the table, their table became a snare, as it is written. Paul quoted this. I believe Paul did. About how, the curse has come upon them in that sense. Because it should have been for their benefit, but it's a snare. Christ himself is the chief cornerstone and a stumbling block because they stumble at him. Christ, the very thing which should be for their benefit, the very Messiah who is their king. He is a stumbling block. But all this is not that they should be destroyed. Not for God's people anyways, not for the Jews. But rather, in God's time, blindness has happened to Israel. But as far as Christ goes, I never consider, nobody, they are not collectively responsible for his death, unless we all are, in that sense, because he was bruised for our iniquities, right? And their iniquities. They were the people who happened to be there. They happened to be blinded in that moment. And not all, of course. Many of God's people received the Lord at his coming. That they became disassociated from the nation of Israel. Because they cast them out. And it's hard. And so whoever's left is automatically going to be in that, trained up to disbelieve. But that does not make, they are enemies for the gospel's sake, but beloved for the Father's sake, is what the Apostle Paul taught. So, yeah, though they fulfilled many scriptures that was like, you don't want to fulfill. Children don't answer for the sins of their fathers. There's no thing that spreads like that. All it is that when we inherit some sins from our fathers because we continue in them. But we are not being punished for something someone else did. So no one can be liable for the blood of Christ in any particular way. I think of Judas in my mind. I don't know, Judas is kind of, but the point, I mean, just like generationally and stuff like that, where people try to talk about because yes, there is blindness that has happened to them collectively, but that's God's doing. So it has to be considered in that light. It's not, in some sense, as they, Christ was smitten he was bruised for our iniquities. He was wounded for our transgressions. Right? And he was persecuted. And they persecuted his followers. Right? But they themselves now have been chastised and smitten. It's like, don't boast against the branches, as Paul also said. And I would never want to be found as a person who persecutes the Jews, because God will not, he will not accept that. That is not, just like it says here, don't persecute Jacob. Jacob has been smitten by God in some sense also. And so we should not persecute them. And not that, not that it's a big question, but I mean, I'll tell you what, I've hung around with a lot of young people, and there's a lot of anti-Jew stuff out there, and people buy into it. And it's such a mistake, because scapegoating on a group of people is a historically horrible way to deal with societal problems. It's to say it's all their fault. That's absolutely one of the worst ideas in human history that has never done anything except bring misery and evil. Because the people who believe in those philosophies end up doing evil. And so it should not be tolerated even a little. I mean, as far as, not that the government should get involved. I'm just saying we don't tolerate it with our tongues. We don't tolerate it. We immediately go after that stuff and knock that down. Intellectually and rhetorically. Not acceptable. So add iniquity unto their iniquity. And let not them come into thy righteousness. What he's saying is, let them be more sinful. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. Revelation. That's Revelation 22. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. And then it mentions the book of the living, which is also right there in Revelation 20, the book of life. Now, but it says, let them not come into thy righteousness. Because coming into God's righteousness is the way of redemption. Now, we can't be righteous. Our way into the righteousness of God is through Christ. It is through his completed sacrifice and his work on the cross, which we cannot add to for our salvation. I can do nothing. Nothing we do as far as works and serving the Lord has anything to do with why we get saved. It is all after party. So it's all after the fact. You've been saved, and now you're doing all God's will, and as you should, as much as possible. In the Lord, we know we're supposed to do God's will, and labor in the works that he has given us. And that's right. But that has no bearing on my salvation. That's just, unrelated. Well, no, in a sense, it has bearing on my salvation. It's because I'm saved that I'm able to do this. It's because I'm saved that God accepts my works. Because there's no work I could do to make myself acceptable to God. I can't reconcile myself by myself. I am reconciled to God through Christ and Christ alone. And then everything else after that is just his work in me. And it's all good. But it is not in any way meant to add to that finished work. Now, we want to add to our faith virtue, knowledge, temperance, and all that. We want to add a lot of things. But we're never adding to the work of Christ, which is what saves us. It's his blood and his blood alone that saves us. And that should never be, you should never have let anyone convince you otherwise. Because to do so is to take away from his work by adding your own to it and saying like, well, I'm saved by Christ's sacrifice plus my own doings. It's like to say that what he did was not sufficient. It wasn't a sufficient sacrifice for my sins and we needed to add extra things. No, it was absolutely sufficient. And so there is no work that can be added to it. And because the purpose of our works is not to add to our salvation. That's the point. It's not. It is to do God's will. It's that now we're saved. You know, it's interesting. How many more verses? Okay, we're getting close to the place where it is. Oh yeah, when he starts talking about how he's going to praise him. But like he despiseth not his prisoners. That's what I was thinking about. You know, he leads captivity captive. We are captive to Satan and to sin on one hand. But then Christ comes and he delivers us. But he doesn't just throw us out into the open. He takes us captive to himself. And it's weird. You know, because in some ways, you know, we live in a free country, but in a sense, we're also captive here. I mean, it's not like you can go anywhere else. Or you can, but those places are worse. That's the point. It's like, with Christ, I'm captive with him. Can I go other places? Well, yeah, technically. But do I want to? No. I'm a captive. I'm his captive. I'm a captive to righteousness. Just like in being an American, you are a captive to freedom. I mean, it's a burden. It's a responsibility. It's not just, and if you don't take it as such, in fact, the fact that people haven't taken it as such is the reason why we're in so much trouble. Because self-government doesn't work if we don't govern ourselves. And we're not governing ourselves. We're being governed by bureaucrats. And it's going off the rails pretty fast. And who knows where it's going to end up. You know, but probably when things go off the rails, the next thing that happens is usually a train wreck, unfortunately. So here we go. Ready for the train wreck? I don't say these things lightly. Because I believe the things that come out of my mouth are going to happen. But I am poor and sorrowful. It's not like you need a special insight with God to know this. This is not, it's not by divine decree. It's just by, it is sort of divine. It's like because the systems, the way the world works in many ways, as far as consequences and such of actions, the repercussions and all, that's God's doing. Oh, you bet. The truth, don't you know that the truth is watching? Like, we can lie, we can make things up, we can print funny money, but in the end, the truth is just there. Whatever the value is, the value. The thing is, I recommend study the works of Thomas Sowell. Basic Economics is a great introduction, and I'll say no more. I will praise the name of God with a song. I will. Okay, wait. Let them be blotted out of the book of the living. Again, he's not praying for them. David's not praying for them. No. He wants them dead, and dead forever. Hey, you know what? God does too. There's not. It's not entirely. It's not that it's wrong. You understand? It's not that what David did was wrong. It's not wrong. It's just better for us to bless and curse not. That's just what Christ has called us to. What he's doing is not actually wrong. It's just, The problem is it could be. You know what I mean? The problem is it could be. You wouldn't want to curse, because at a certain point in history, you might have cursed the Apostle Paul if you were cursing the enemies of God. Let all those who are persecuting the church, let them be blotted out of your book and blah, 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 blah. You're praying against God's elect. And not that God's just going to look at your prayer and go, oh, well, there's one I can ignore. But it's not good for you. I don't want my prayers ignored because I'm praying stupid prayers to God that he doesn't want to hear. I've had feeling where I've prayed myself, Lord, let me stomp their skulls in. I don't know why that's the particular way I like to think of it. There are some evils done. Like there are many things where I'm like, I can't do that. And the people who can, I don't know. Like I said, a part of me feels, yes, let them be blotted out of the book of the living. But then again, if God in his grace and mercy feels he could redeem such, I don't want to stand in his way. I sure as heck won't stand in his way. I don't want to pray against what God has willed either. Jesus taught us a lot of wisdom in the way we should approach God, I think, in that regard. I always look at his example, because he is our example. He's not an easy act to follow. We talk about following Jesus, but it's like, think about it. It's talking about one of the hardest hardest person in the world to follow is Jesus, if you ask me. To be like him? Come on. It's like nobody's even come close. Really, I mean, I'm only in a certain sense, maybe. But really? Nah. None that I've heard. John the Baptist, his forerunner. Yeah, he was, but you have to go back. I am poor and sorrowful. Let thy salvation, O God, set me up on high. See, I think he's saying, he's just cursing him, man. Cursing him. I'll let them be blotted out, man. I don't want them to be written with the righteous. Let their iniquity add iniquity to their iniquity. If they like drugs, man, just have them find a stash. Just like have them find a big stash and just shoot up till they're dead. He does so badly. But then he says, but I'm poor and sorrowful. Because he's saying this out of the sorrow of his heart. And he says, let your salvation set me up on high. Your salvation. I don't want to take comfort in God's cursing of the enemy. And, it is comforting to remember that God's wrath will be poured out on the wicked. Still, I'll tell you what's going to set me up on high. It's going to make, literally set me up on high. That means pretty much like what you might think it. Literally like high. Like on a high, not necessarily chemically, but like feeling good, in high spirits. Also, to be higher up also has a lot of symbolic meaning as far as like being at an advantage. Exultant, celebrant, celebrating. All these things, you get up on high to speak to a multitude. You get up on high to put your fist in the air in victory. The victor stands on the highest podium. He's saying, let your salvation put me up in a high place, God. Let me feel elevated by your salvation. He's saying, I want to focus on God's salvation to my elevation as opposed to focusing on cursing the enemy. Who is, the curse is, the thing is, it's all true. They're cursed. They're cursed. You don't have to add to it. God has already cursed them. Rather, God will be more pleased with you. I mean, like I said, he'll be more pleased when we praise his name with a song, when we magnify him with thanksgiving. That is pleasing to God. And that also, well, if you want God to set you up on high, sometimes it helps to start climbing yourself and start by singing praises to the Lord. It has a wonderful way of raising the spirits. When you sing to God, when you make music in your heart or with your lips, it has a way of lifting the spirit. And being filled with thankfulness is also good for you. Like it is literally good for you to, when you feel thankful, as opposed to bitter and angry, resentful, jealous, you will be so much happier. You'll be so much more content. That's where peace is. In thankfulness. When we're thankful for the things we have, when we're thankful for the salvation that's been wrought, realizing that it's all finished. And we, sometimes it's a hard road. Mostly because I make it hard, I think. I don't think the Lord does anything, I don't feel like, God, why are you doing this to me? I don't usually feel that way. I mostly feel like a lot, what he's done to me has allowed me enough rope to hang myself at times. Because I blame myself. He's allowed me to be me. And that's part of his plan, is for me to be me. And so I have to deal with me also. What I mean is dealing with myself is a part of the challenging road I have to walk. And each of us, in some way, that also too, for you, yourself. This will please the Lord better than an ox or a bullock that hath horns and hooves. It's probably, including the part about horns and hooves. I don't know, sometimes I think some of this stuff is just added because linguistically, for the poem or the song, it was necessary to have a few syllables there. I often in songs find that that's what I need. I need I need either more or fewer syllables in this line. And that's always like kind of the challenging part of getting a lyric right. The words have to sound right and be, as well as mean the right thing. But God delights not in sacrifice of that kind. Meaning every kind of sacrifice represents giving up, we're giving up something of value to us. So sacrificing an animal might be a significant sacrifice for some people, like a whole cow, holy moly, that's a lot of meat. It's a lot of value. Like if you were, an ox or a bullock, I don't know how much they cost, but I'm guessing $1,000 or more, for a full, for a slaughter ready beef. I'm assuming it's maybe more than that. I don't know. I live in a farming area, and I know there's a place that sells, like fresh meat just down the road, and you can get quarters and halves of animals. I just forgot how much they weighed. And I know they weigh a lot though, right? Not weigh, how much they cost, actually. Well, if you think about how much they weigh, and then you think about how much meat costs, you figure that's a lot of meat. Anyways, it's a lot of money. And so that is a significant sacrifice for some people. For other people, it's not much of a sacrifice. But what's kind of the same for everybody is a song. If you sing a song to the Lord, doesn't matter if you're a rich man, doesn't matter if you're a poor man, you're giving up exactly as much of your time, you're giving up exactly as much as, or you have the potential to give up exactly as much of your effort, of your love, of your devotion. You can have exactly equal sacrifices. Because it's not about the money. Because sometimes people have so much money that it doesn't mean anything. For a poor man, sacrificing an ox could be a huge deal. David, not so much. And he's saying a song is better. God delights more in a song. And, and especially you consider a song you put some effort into that you wrote yourself, of course. Or even sung it yourself. Because it's not just like putting on the radio and here I'll play a song to the Lord. Some people like that. They do that all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's a very good thing to do. But it's not quite the level of like singing it yourself to God, like directly, or writing your own song to God. That's, David wrote songs, and he thought that would please God better than an ox. Just magnify him with thanksgiving. It doesn't say he wrote anything. He just magnify God by giving him thanks. And he's doing this from a position of height, at least in the narrative, right? So when you're magnifying God in a high place, saying, God, set me on high, and I will praise you with a song. Set me in a high place means make me conspicuous too, also in a sense. Like, let me get, like the way they do pulpits, they raise them up so that all can hear. Put me in a place where everyone will hear me, and I will sing, and I will magnify your name. It's not just private, I think. Because this is about praising God and letting other people see it. That is better to God than making a sacrifice. Especially because, his way of praising God is not just to say thank you and praise you, but he also gets really specific about it. He talks about how God is and what God does for us. And not just words that are, just, hey, praise you, praise you, praise you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is good to say what you're thankful for. It's good to say why is he worthy of praise. So he says, the humble shall see this and be glad, and your heart shall live that seek God. Your heart shall live. In Psalm 22, that's another, he uses that phrase when he Psalm 22 is the psalm where it says, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And also, it's the one where it says they pierced my hands and feet and all that. And it describes very vividly what can only be imagined to be the crucifixion of Christ. And so when you hear that psalm, I have a song version of it, but about halfway through, the song goes from him feeling all this, the horror of his death, to realizing that the God does hear, and that God does not despise the suffering or the affliction of the afflicted, and has not hid his face from him. Neither has he hid his face from him. But when he cried unto him, he heard. And then it goes on to talk about, I will praise you in the great congregation. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. Right? But one of the things it says, your heart shall live forever. And it's just to say, they that seek... Wait, let me just, I'll just bring it up. I'm trying to do it from memory. Unfortunately, if I don't recite the verses in order, I can't remember them all. And that, you might expect that. I'll remember them all, but out of order. Unless I recite them in order. So if I start on a random verse, I end up going, I might start the verse after the one I want. Oh, ye that fear the Lord, praise him. All the seed of Jacob, glorify him and fear him. For he has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. Neither hath he hid his face from him. But it was like verse 22. Oh, no, I'm the one right there. Verse 26. The meek shall eat and be satisfied. They shall praise the Lord that seek him. Your heart shall live forever. All the ends of the world shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the kindreds of the nations shall worship. Nations shall worship before thee. I jumped from nations to worship in one step. In 29 it says, and none can keep alive his own soul. I can't get down there, but that's what it says. But that part about your heart shall live, it just is a phrase. I've only encountered David using it in the Psalms. But it may be just a more common phrase in the Hebrew. But your heart... Sorry. Got a hiccup. Your heart shall live that seek God. But our hearts should live. Interesting way to put it. I mean... And of course, it just means... It's just talking about you going on to live, but focusing on looking at that part, the heart. Because... the heart that seeks, because we seek God with the heart. At least that is how it is conceptualized in the scriptures. So the heart that seeks God shall live. And that is where we must seek God, because that is where those things happen. The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? But God tries the reins. He tries the heart. That's where he tests us. That's where he finds us. And because what it means is the center, because what it represents, it's not the organ that pumps the blood. The heart is not the organ that pumps your blood. It is the center of your being, of who you are at the deepest level. It's who you really are. Not the stuff that you outwardly let other people see, not the facade we put up for others to get to know us and what we've shown or what we reveal or how we present ourselves publicly. But it's who you are at the very depth of your soul that even you may not even really fully know. Because, like I said, it's deceitful. Our heart will deceive, even we ourselves can be deceived by our own hearts. Because of the desires deep down, our heart can conceal things from our intellect. I mean, we can have secret desires that usurp our intentions. You have to be careful. The heart, it can be a deceitful organ. When I say it's not the thing that pumps your blood, I mean, scripturally speaking, it's not the organ that pumps your blood. It is the center of your being. That's what it's talking about. When it talks about your heart, it's not talking about the thing that pumps blood. For the Lord here at the poor. We're out of time. All right. Well, it's pretty well. Boy, I kind of don't want to have to come back to the Psalm tomorrow. For the Lord heareth the poor, and despiseth not his prisoners. Like I said, the God is not a respecter of persons. He does not ignore you if you're poor and heed you if you're rich. He despises not his prisoners. Despise, probably, in the terms of the way prisoners were often in the ancient world mistreated very badly. And like I said, you are either captive to Satan or captive to Christ. There's really not a choice. You're in one kind of captivity or another. You're either going to serve Satan or serve God, but you're going to serve somebody. If you serve yourself, well then with yourself, you will go down into destruction as all. Because that's essentially serving Satan as well. Because as the Satanists know, that's Satan's whole thing, right? Me. It's not about you, it's about him. And if you're, interestingly, they take up Satanism all about them. They want to be like Satan, not worshipers of him. Though they don't understand Satan. Satan doesn't teach you to be independent-minded and thinking and all that stuff. Though he may himself think for himself, he wants to put into bondage. Never be deceived about that. Let the heaven and the earth praise him, the seas and everything that moves in it. So that's a very common theme throughout the Bible, the book of Revelation, everywhere, it talks about all creation worshiping God, all creation recognizing that the creation itself groans and travails for the manifestation of the sons of God. The creation wants to get to God's kingdom. The creation wants God's sons to be manifest as God's sons and not as flesh and blood destructive creatures that we are. Because the world will be made a better place under the hand of God's servants as opposed to under the hand of sinful man. God will save Zion and build the cities of Judah, that they may dwell there and have it in possession. God's salvation for Zion, his holy hill. This is the hill. Why do you jump up high hills? This is the hill where God has put his name. Zion. And also, of course, Zion is symbolic of that place where God has put his name, his ultimate city, the New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, which is representative of the church of God, of Jew and Gentile together in one body, serving Christ. And again, that they may dwell there and have it in possession. The seed of his servants shall inherit it, and they that love his name shall dwell therein. There's always a promise to the servants of God that it is not just for you, but also for your seed. That your children have I don't want to call it but just a certain kind of access by being the child of God's servant, and a certain kind of also just God is promised to sanctify them, or implicitly. You know what I mean? Like when it says the unbelieving spouse is sanctified by the believing, else your children would be unclean. It implies that that is the sanctifying of the parent is a real thing that God takes up, and so they become, like born into the faith. And it doesn't mean that they don't have to go on, but it is true, because it's like I said, I didn't like come to Jesus. Jesus was always God, and I became more committed to him as time went on. But there was no like start to believe point. I never tried to, oh, now I really believe. It's like I always really believed. And yeah, I went from belief to doubt and back to belief again, and that happens. But still, never stopped believing. Okay, so they that love his name shall dwell there. And that is where the seed of God's servants, they that love his name. No, there's two kinds. The seed, and also any who would come. Whosoever will, let him take of the river of water of life. Let him take the water of life freely. Those who rejoice in God's salvation have access to this kingdom. And and we should not take it lightly. We should get excited about it and prepare ourselves for it, because that's all there is to life, really, is to get ready for God's kingdom. And the way you do that is by living a life that is oriented towards that kingdom. And the cool thing is, it gives you a good life. Forsaking the old life, you find even in this present world, you can have in God a life that is really fulfilling and worth living. So, merely by seeking a kingdom which is not of this world. All right, so we'll be back again tomorrow to continue, and we'll be picking up with Psalm 70. Until then, thanks for joining this study. I look forward to being back tomorrow.
Make a joyful sound unto Yahweh, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. Know ye that Yahweh, he is God. He hath made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving, and into his courts with praise. Be thankful to him. Bless his name, for Yahweh is good. His mercy eternal, his truth to all generations.